Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Arthur. Welcome to WizeUp. Talking today about some of Canada's natural resources. Fossil fuels. Are they destroying the planet? Some people think so. On the other hand, are they providing much needed jobs? Some people think that too. So we're going to talk about that and more today. Our guest joins us from Calgary, Cody Battershill. He's the founder of Canada Action. That's a volunteer-led grassroots movement. They encourage Canadians to take action to support our natural resources sectors in Canada. Their website, canadaaction.ca. So, hey, thanks for making time for us today, Cody.
Paul, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the chance to be here.
Oh, you bet. This will be fun to talk about. I mean, you know what amazes me, Cody, is that after decades of left-leaning political leaders, continually canceling and blocking pipeline development in our nation, their stated goal to, basically, shut down oil and gas development, now suddenly they're saying, we could use maybe a couple of more pipelines, coast to coast. Of course, this is coming from tariff threats from the U.S., but I just found that fascinating. Going, wow, well, we've got a wake-up call here in Canada that there's now, it seems, kind of a go-ahead from various political leaders that normally wouldn't go that way, and even from the general public saying, you know what, we should go coast to coast. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's a reminder that we're going to need all forms of energy to keep the lights on, keep our economies moving. It's a
Hmm.
reminder that we shouldn't be playing political football, so to speak,
Right.
with issues of the economy and issues of energy. It's a reminder that many people have been saying for a long time, let's not block and obstruct this investment in Canada. Instead, let's build, let's collaborate, let's unite, and let's talk about how we can support our families and also get energy to countries around the world that are trying to develop and improve their living standards. And now, with these tariff threats, it's also a reminder that having a single customer that you're relying upon for most of your trade is not necessarily always a good strategy if they change their mind or go in a different direction. And in the case of the United States, they are producing more oil themselves than ever before. They're also the world's largest LNG exporter. So, really, we look back at the last 10 years of obstructing and delaying projects, pipelines, energy infrastructure, LNG. And in that time frame, we have no operating LNG projects, for example, but the United States is, now the world's largest exporter. It's just a reminder that these efforts to obstruct and delay and keep investment, job creating investment out of Canada, shutting down these projects, it hasn't actually reduced global consumption by a single molecule. Instead, it's helped other countries. Qatar, the United States, Australia are now the world's three biggest LNG exporters. And of course, Saudi Arabia and Russia and all these other oil exporters. They've been able to grow their market share potentially at the expense of Canada. I mean, we should have built Northern Gateway.
Oh,
Trans
man.
Mountain should have been built sooner. And of course, Energy East among the oil pipeline projects, not to mention LNG projects on the East Coast, in Quebec, and in BC, just to get started.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we heard our prime minister say, well, there's not a business case to be made for exporting, liquid natural gas to Germany. Are you kidding me? In hindsight, I think we're all going, that might have been a really, really good idea. So, a recent Angus Reid poll showing 79%. That's a pretty, chunky number of Canadians saying that Canada needs oil and gas pipelines going sea to sea. So, even Quebec, right? So, people in Quebec are saying this. Now, the politicians haven't jumped on board with that yet. So, I'm wondering. Any thoughts on whether these kinds of signals coming from the public would enable Quebec to jump on board? Or let me ask you this. I don't know. Is it possible to go coast to coast without Quebec's okay? Just go around Quebec through Ontario sort of thing?
I think at the end of the day, we want to have Quebec on board. There
Mm-hmm.
could potentially be other routes, like through Manitoba into the Bay of Churchill. But at the end of the day, last year, Canada still imported a lot of oil, even though we have a lot of oil ourselves, because we don't have connectivity from Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan all the way to Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces. So we are still importing oil from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
We're still importing oil from Nigeria. And I think it would be smart to talk about making Canada more energy secure. So let's reduce those foreign oil imports. Let's make sure Canadians are buying Canadian made energy. Let's keep the economic benefits in Canada, first and foremost. Second, Europe and Asia have been asking for Canadian LNG and energy. We said no business case. We've, sort of seen these projects shut down. At the same time, Qatar and the United States, even Australia, they're selling more into Europe. So we're at a point, we got to recognize the error that we've made. We need to try to unite. 79% across the country supporting pipelines is a big number, especially in Quebec, where, to be fair, they don't have any active rigs. They don't have a history of oil and gas in Quebec. So maybe a lot of people there have been misled potentially by some of the anti-pipeline groups who have not been honest, who have not been talking about growing global demand and the necessity of getting Canadian energy to the world. They've been simply trying to shut down Canada. And we know that that's not going to help our families, and it's not going to contribute in a pragmatic sense to supporting all forms of energy as long as we need it. They've also, of course, not been acknowledging Canada's record of leadership in hydro, wind, and all these other aspects. But that's what they do. They spread doom and gloom. So maybe now we're starting to see Canadians recognize that narrative of fear was built on a lot of falsehoods. And maybe now we can really come together. I think it's an important time. It's an important opportunity to work on that unification, that unity across the country.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see where this goes. Hopefully, I'm hoping anyway that this sentiment will continue and that we actually do build some pipelines coast to coast. Of course, that takes money, it takes time, and so forth, but big dividends for our economy for sure. Now, the reasons we typically hear, I think, from environmentalists who oppose fossil fuels and pipelines is that there's a climate emergency, right? And that greenhouse gas emissions are an imminent danger to our planet, to our existence. So how would you respond to those who are saying, we get it that, yeah, there's going to be an economic benefit, but that's outweighed by the threat to our environment? How do you respond to that?
I think first and foremost, you have to look at Canada's contribution within the world, where today our emissions are the same per capita in the world as they were in the early 1900s. Of course, we see record coal-fired power generation getting built in other countries. Of course, we see continuing global population growth. We see continuing families and communities trying to achieve healthcare, education, school, roads, modernization, urbanization, and just simply increasing living standards. There's still a billion people that don't cook with clean fuels. There's still a billion or more people that don't have reliable, affordable access to electricity. A billion or more. And there's a lot of conflict in the world today. So I think we have to look at the environmental component. I think we have to ask, what's Canada been doing? We have to look at Canada's record. We have to look at how we rank in the world. In many instances, we are leading in many, many regards to environmental metrics as per the government, as per international organizations. We are ninth in the world for installed wind capacity, and our power grid is among the highest of non-emitting power generation in the world. Again, things that we should be celebrating, but at the same time, demand is growing for oil and natural gas as well. And why would we not want to get our liquefied natural gas to countries like South Korea that have been saying that they need it? At the same time, they've also been looking at more coal potentially, or nuclear, or renewables. And maybe we need to get back to pragmatism on an all of the above standpoint.
Okay.
That's very, very important.
So you're not overly concerned that there's a danger to our environment to the extent that, our existence is in danger, that sort of thing. And again, Canada on the global scale contributes such a tiny amount to these emissions into the CO2 emissions and so forth. So what difference would it make in that sense? Now I know I'm not going to convince I guess the climate alarmist crowd in this, but I think we need to take a look at the big picture for sure. Now, I think, again, on the anti-fossil fuel side, the argument would be that it doesn't make sense to build pipelines now. That's what I'm hearing them say, because in their view, the global demand for oil and gas is going to drop significantly because, I guess, wind and power and solar power and that sort of thing, green power. But is that the case, or is it actually continuing to rise? I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
Well, Paul, to be clear, of course, we would all agree that we should be protecting the environment. But this
Mm-hmm.
idea of shutting down Canada is actually the wrong way to go about it. Canada can have the largest possible global positive impact by getting our resources to those countries asking, helping to take market share and feed into growing global demand for energy. On your second point, the same people today saying we shouldn't build pipelines because oil and gas demand has peaked or will peak, they've been saying the same thing for over 15 years.
Yeah.
And for over 15 years, demand has continued to go up every single day. And for over 15 years, they've been blocking Canadian job creating investment. They've been blocking labor, non labor, Indigenous, non Indigenous, and employment and investment for all that benefits all Canadians, that supports our social programs and grows Canada's economy. They've been blocking that. And at the same time, they've never bothered to oppose or protest an oil tanker coming to Canada from Saudi Arabia or Alaskan oil tankers on the West Coast. Their argument, when you look at it, is built on a pile of falsehoods. And so they will say the same thing today that they've been saying for 15 years. They've been wrong for the last 15 years. They have no credibility when they talk about oil and natural gas demand, forecasts, or projections. And at the end of the day, as Canadians, we need to support and take care of our families and our communities. We need to continue to invest in reducing our environmental impact. And we need to have a balanced conversation about protecting the environment and protecting our economy and making sure that when you go to the fridge, there's power and there's food in it. When you go to the grocery store, there's food on the shelves. Energy and resource and food security in a world with conflict is also very important. How can we make more stuff in Canada? How can we reshore and secure our supply chain? But at the same time, you cannot just take Canada out of the global equation and think that has any impact. It doesn't. It's actually a negative as other countries take our market share.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, I think. And we need to be considering these things. Is it possible that, I'm wrong somewhere or you're wrong somewhere, right? We need to be open to the possibility that, okay, let's listen, what's actually happening? And as far as, demand going down for petroleum products, can you just enlighten us a little bit on, the oil and gas is not just to fill our cars or to heat our homes. You talk about just everything that we use in the world today. So many things actually depend on petrochemicals to make them, all the plastics. I mean, the rubber in your bicycle that you're driving to reduce emissions, that comes from petrochemicals, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And, I'd like to also remind your viewers that ever since the first Earth Day in the 1970s, all of these doomsday apocalyptic environmental projections have not come to actually happen. And one of the key reasons is because as a society, as a world, as a species, we continue to adapt and innovate. And we will continue to adapt and innovate to reduce our footprint and feed a growing global population. Now, when we talk about feeding a growing global population and what oil and natural gas enables us as a species to do, half of the world's food today is grown with fertilizer that's dependent upon
Hmm.
natural gas for its production. That would be one of the starkest examples I could give you. And I have done debates with people who want to shut down Canada. They say we don't need
Yeah.
oil and gas at all. I ask them, who would you choose to receive food and who would you choose to go without if we lost
Yep.
half of the
Yep.
world's food supply? There is no alternative today to oil and natural gas from a transportation, heat, and materials standpoint. And what we've actually seen is with growing production of renewable energy from wind and solar, it hasn't actually reduced fossil fuel demand. It simply helped meet growing total demand. And let's talk about wind and solar for a second.
Hmm.
Wind turbines do not make themselves. Wind turbines require a lot of fossil fuels for their manufacture, and mining in fossil fuels, of course, for their manufacture and installation. A wind turbine might last 10 to 15 years. It will then have to be replaced, whereas a natural gas power plant might last 30 to 45 years. These are just some rough examples. You have to look at the total life cycle inputs to all of these different technologies. Wind and solar require mining and fossil fuels to make, install, and run. And of course, when the wind is not blowing, you need backup because we need 24/7 reliable and affordable base power. Now, Canada's ninth in the world for installed wind capacity. Let's celebrate that. But let's also celebrate the women and men who make up our oil and natural gas industry. They are keeping us alive in the winter. They are contributing to helping feed half the global population. When we go to a hospital, when we go on a holiday, when we go to our homes, when we go to our grocery stores, every single thing that we see is made with or made possible or transported with oil and natural gas in some way, shape, or form. There is no quick transition away from that. And the people saying that, who have been saying that for decades, they're wrong. And they're spreading fear, falsehoods, and misinformation. And we need to join together for a pragmatic, positive, fact-based
Hmm.
conversation to move Canada forward. We need
Yeah.
those pipelines. We need trade diversification.
Yeah, I think the fear factor plays into this whole climate alarmism thing, and I think it's somewhat, well, quite a bit hyperbole, exaggerated fear. And again, I think we're all on board that we, yes, want to keep a clean environment as much as possible, but like you talk about, a pragmatic balance needs to be in place here as well. And you talk about, nations around the world. And most countries around the world have a much lower standard of living, and than Canada does. They don't have the finances that we have here, so we can't force our green power costs onto these countries that can't afford it. And so they're trying to grow crops and they're trying to stay alive, trying to stay warm or cool or whatever the case might be. They need power to do that, energy. And, they're not going to get it from solar probably like we get here or wind power because it's expensive to put into place. But what about coal? Where are we at with international coal demand? I'm told continues to rise as well, and it's very affordable then for some of these poorer nations to use coal. And of course, I understand that Canada has some of the best technology in the world to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, any kind of dirty stuff going into the air when you burn coal for electricity. So where are we at with that? I mean, here in southern Alberta, we've got some contention around the Grassy Mountain Coal Project. There's support from local indigenous tribes, that they would benefit financially from that. A lot of locals would get jobs out of it, but there's concern, of course, that, perhaps the watershed could get contaminated and so forth. So legitimate concerns. So we need to look at whether that's, possible to do this without damaging the environment or not. But we have this incredible anti-coal. Coal is horrible for everybody, everywhere, all the time. But is that actually accurate, or is coal potentially a big picture benefit for people? What are your thoughts?
Well, first we have to make the distinction between thermal coal for power generation and
Hmm.
metallurgical coal, which helps create steel. And we are a large producer of metallurgical coal in Canada, and we export a lot of that to the world. Around the world, thermal coal demand for power generation is at a record high. And there's been a lot of these environmental groups saying for a very long time, coal's peaked, coal's done, coal's
Yeah.
over, coal's the past, beyond coal. But coal is still being consumed at a record volume. And we have to think about if it was your family who had to choose between supporting the construction of a coal power plant or trying to get a plastic bag that you could trap petroleum gas in to bring to your home to then try to use for heating or cooking, there are there's much more to the conversation when we talk about how many people, a billion plus, that don't have electricity, reliable electricity, a billion plus that don't have clean cooking fuel. We have to have that broader conversation. And I think as far as building stuff in Canada, we need to take a balanced approach. We've seen $670 billion of resource projects stalled, canceled, delayed, obstructed over the past decade. Those projects, if they had gone forward, we would not be as vulnerable currently to the tariff situation with the United States. We would have a stronger national economy, more revenues coming into our governments, more job creation. So we do need to balance the can-do Canadian spirit with security of power, food, and energy, and security for our economy,
Yeah.
along with the environment. We got to think about the stool and making sure that stool is balanced.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. We talked earlier about, we still import oil from places like Saudi Arabia, and we kind of shake our heads like, why would we need to do that with the population we have and all the oil and gas we have here? So, I mean, part of it is probably, our capacity to refine some of these things. Again, if I understand correctly, we ship oil to the States, and it gets refined and then gets shipped back up to us here as well, right? So if that's the case, do we need to invest into, more refineries here in Canada? How does that work?
Yeah, good question, Paul. So Canada has approximately 17 refineries. We are a net exporter of oil and refined products, but we do not have the infrastructure, the pipelines in place to ensure that a Canadian barrel of gasoline from Alberta can reach a gas station in Ontario. We don't necessarily have that infrastructure. There is the Line 5 pipeline. It goes from Canada into the United States and then back up into Ontario. So of course, if we say we're going to shut off oil exports, the US could say, well, then we're going to shut off that Line 5 pipeline. There's more to the conversation around working with the United States, and we have to work with the United States. That's our
Yep.
largest trading partner, our ally, sharing the world's longest undefended border. We have to listen to their concerns, and we have to find a solution forward with them to work together. Our military, our security. There's a lot of real issues here that we've let linger in this country that we need to fix, that we need to work on. At the
For
same
sure.
time, we need to be diversifying our trade. So more oil to Asia, more natural gas to Asia, and also to Europe. And let's figure out how we can get Canadian oil to the refinery in New Brunswick so they don't have to buy oil from Saudi Arabia and they don't have to buy oil from Nigeria. Let's try to connect the country better. Let's try to make ourselves more energy secure, also more economically secure with more trade diversification. And let's pull our weight.
Okay.
Let's pull our weight
Yep.
with our military spending.
Oh, I would agree on that one for sure. That's a whole nother topic, but I would agree. Let me ask you, I guess, where do you see this, whole public fossil fuel debate going over the next decade or so? I mean, is this just going to be a temporary blip we're seeing now? This favor now toward, yes, let's build some coast-to-coast pipelines because of the tariff threats, that sort of thing, a reaction to that? Or is there going to be ongoing public support, do you think, in favor of Canada, putting legislation into place that will create a reliable and stable business environment that will attract opportunities for investors. They'll say, hey, yes, we can invest in Canada. We're going to get, some bang for our buck, and, it'll make a difference long term.
What I've always said for more than a decade is that it doesn't matter who you vote for, 1 + 1 = 2. And whoever wins our elections, provincially, municipally, federally, they need to be honest with Canadians. They need to focus on the economy, our contribution to the world. We need to get back to that can-do Canadian attitude. We need to build. We need to attract that job-creating investment. When we look back over the last decade, all of the doomsday, all of the negativity, all of the fear, the Greta Thunbergs of the world, all of these environmental groups that have been shutting down Canada and ignoring the resulting consequences of their actions while helping other producers. It's like the pendulum has swung pretty far now. I think people are tired of the fear. I think that people don't see the fear coming to fruition. I think people are tired of that same negative message. I think that people want a strong economy, continue to balance that with our environmental commitments, but you can't simply shut Canada down and say you've done something good for the world, because that's actually the opposite. We need more Canada, not less.
All right. Thank you so much for your input today. Really appreciate it, Cody.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Cody Battershill. Again, I want to put a plug in here for their website so you can check it out yourself, canadaaction.ca, and there's all kinds of articles on there that will be helpful as well. Okay, thank you for watching, everybody. You can check out our podcast at WizeUp.ca or at app.corcoplus.com, and you can also drop us a line anytime with comments and suggestions, paul@WizeUp.ca. God bless.